Mideast Realities, a unique half-hour highlighting the real Middle East. It is a program of information that government and media often misrepresent or just don't want you to know. Get the news without bias. Facts without distortion. And most importantly, analysis from the experts. With your host and chairman of the Committee on the Middle East, Mertv Svhs Sd. Each week, this program will feature an interview, discussion, or an event to help viewers understand the complex situation in today's Middle East, and especially the realities of U.S. policies toward that crucial region of the world. Mideast Realities.
It will have to come through vested interest, through the domestic needs of domestic politics, the needs of domestic politics. So I think that's the role for you. It's not the role for me, who, after all, is a foreigner in this country and a guest in this country.
Yes, sir.
The United Nations, as I recall, was created with the idea so there would never be another Hitler, never another world conflagration. And yet it seems in this catastrophe that the United Nations is the Hitler because of their insistence that Iraq doesn't have a legitimate right to defend itself, to have weapons which Israel and the United States has. Can you think of a way, short of total abolition of the United Nations, which I favor, to reform the United Nations in such a way so that this Hitler, this tyrant never rises again, and so this atrocity against Iraq is reversed and so it can never be repeated?
Let me define what is the United Nations. The United Nations is an intergovernmental organization of member states. It's the member states that determine policy. In fact, it's the member states only of the Security Council which have determined the imposition of sanctions on Iraq. So it's the member states we've got to look to, not to the Secretariat of the United Nations itself. Now, you may feel I'm speaking defensively as a 30-year veteran of the United Nations Secretariat, but in fact that is the reality of the situation. The Secretariat, the Secretary General, is required to carry out the instructions of its member states. Now, I tend to perhaps agree with you that the end result of the decisions of the member states has created this appalling situation, and something needs to be done about that. Again, the influence on member states and their role in the United Nations has got to come through the electorate, the voters who put people into power, who create these foreign policy situations and who make determinations through the United Nations. It's a homegrown problem. It's got to be solved from within.
If I can ask you to keep the questions short and succinct so that we can have as many people ask as possible, that'd be great. In the back, the woman in the back. No, speak up loudly.
Yeah, last year we had a similar crisis, and at the last minute, U.S. decided to not bomb Iraq. Last year there was another time when well, there was a council meeting at Ohio State University, if you remember. It was live on CNN. Actually, I was in that meeting, so I'm curious. I was just curious to what extent we had an effect on the U.S. policy, because sometimes I feel like we actually made a difference, but sometimes we feel like, we are being naive thinking that way. So, to your knowledge, to what extent was that council meeting really important? Also, to what extent was it Kofi Annan's personal initiative at that point, which prevented another attack on Iraq?
Well, I think to start at the end, I think the Secretary General took a very courageous position in going to Iraq, sticking out his neck and taking a position which was not, I think, a popular one, and particularly perhaps in Washington. But I think he felt strongly that, and I think he believes sincerely that dialogue, communications is preferable to any other solution, particularly one of missiles coming in from the Gulf, which I must say, for those of us living in Baghdad at the time, we firmly believed was about to happen. I myself was evacuating people, I recall, just before the Secretary General arrived. Now, whether that town meeting had impact, I very much hope it did, and I think that sort of occurrence has got to be repeated again and again and again. And the model that comes back to mind, and I'm not sure I was even living in New York at the time, but the pressure on President Johnson that came was a groundswell of bottom-up abhorrence of the Vietnam War and the cost on all concerned, certainly had dramatic impact. And I think this can be done again. I think there's no substitute for the people of any country speaking through its elected leaders to create change and change policies. Furthermore, we've seen in the past that when it suits member states to dramatically change a policy, it can happen very quickly. One thinks of China, how quickly the position changed vis-à-vis China. So I'm always optimistic that the occasion will arise and policies will be changed. In this case, we don't have any time. We're losing thousands of Iraqi children every month. That reference to one dying every 10 minutes is a horrifying thought. And that requires immediate action. So I think all of you who have a possibility to make a difference must do so.
And in that vein, we once again welcome you to fill out the postcards later on. Yes.
You spoke of compromise. What kind of compromise policy do you see at this juncture it being possible for the Security Council to propose as a way of bringing effective pressure on Saddam Hussein while lifting the sanctions?
Well, I must say I'm a believer in involving member states or leadership that goes off the tracks. The policy of isolation leading to alienation, as far as I can see, has not succeeded anywhere. I think if the only way to move forward is to find a means for this country and the member states to renew its relationship with Iraq, to bring Iraq back into the United Nations family, where Iraq has always played a very significant role. In fact, it was one of the original member states, I believe, founding members, to enable Iraq to regain its dignity and sovereignty, which is of a fundamental importance in all parts of the world, perhaps, but certainly in the Islamic Arab world and in Iraq in particular. A humiliating leadership simply does not produce positive results. I think there needs to be an active policy of dialogue with Iraq. It can be done informally, but there certainly are many areas where this country and Iraq have common ground. As I've said on one of the radio interviews I've done recently, there's a love affair between the average Iraqi and this country. Right now, under sanctions, it's very difficult for the Iraqis to express that affection, for obvious reasons. But deep down, there's nothing but respect and affection for this country. And any opportunity, I think, would be welcomed amongst the leadership and amongst the people of Iraq to reopen the relationship, to open the dialogue with the people and the government of this country. And clearly, there are many means to do that. And I would encourage that process, encourage taking risks, which of course will be inevitable, and reintegrate Iraq and use that integration and dialogue to influence change, no matter how difficult that may be. And I'm not totally naive. It's not going to be easy. But there is common ground, there's interests that are common, and I think that's the only way to go. I don't see sanctions as producing anything positive.
Yes, sir.
Can you share with us your own views on possible reforms of the United Nations power structure, in particular the legitimacy or illegitimacy of the Security Council?
I must say, when I joined the United Nations and went to New York for the first time in 1966, I asked the question as to when the Security Council would be abolished. And I remember I was put down very quickly. But since then it's grown, I think, from 11 to 15 members. But the base problem resides, that is the veto power that 5 members have over everybody else. I think it's a totally redundant, outdated situation. I think the power has got to be given to the General Assembly. But that is not a popular view. In the last several years there's been strenuous efforts to change the power of the Security Council, to rotate the power within the Security Council and so on. It's the only way to go, but it's not something that's easily done, because the 5 members concerned, as long as they have veto power, are not likely to agree to give it up. I think it's as basic as that. But that would be fundamental reform, which, I would agree with you, that has got to be a positive thing.
We have time for a couple of more questions, so if we can just get them, and if we can go in the back, we haven't gone back there. Yes, sir.
Yes. I've traveled to Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and one thing I noticed when I was over there, I just spent a good deal of time over there, was that there's next to no support for Iraq from its own neighboring states. As a matter of fact, in Kuwait there's almost any, because of their POW-MIA situation, of people from Kuwait missing, and their whereabouts are unknown, so they're obviously not going to get much support from them. What do you think Iraq's own neighboring states need to do to generate support? Obviously, if they don't have that support, they're not going to get any support from the rest of the world. What do you think the neighboring states need to have done to get their support?
Well, I think you particularly mentioned Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Those are certainly 2 countries that I would not expect any particular affection right now. But there are many other states in that part of the world that have now reopened their relations with Iraq, not forgetting Iran. The Vice President, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, they were in Tehran in January at the Islamic Conference. They had a wonderful reception. They came back glowing with expectations of a renewed relationship despite the past. And I think Iran's relations to Iraq are fundamentally important, and something which the State Department should not overlook. And I think that's equally true of many other of the immediate neighbors. Even Turkey, although relations there are very strained, Syria, Jordan, of course, and some of the Gulf states, who realize that a balance of power is needed, that Iran and Iraq are essential players, large players in this environment, and that they all have a vested interest, including Kuwait, I would say, of improved Iraqi, Iranian, Kuwaiti relations. It's a small sort of part of the world in many respects, with a short-term wealthy future. Collaboration is important now, but doubly so, I would say, for the future, in terms of holding on to each other and supporting each other when things get rough, when the oil revenues decline. And of course the irony of the present program may be that when oil has run out in some of the Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, Iraq will have the oil reserves, which nobody else will then have. But I'm all for regional cooperation and having the United Nations work to that end. I think we have to look at the Iraq issue, the Iran issue, in the context of the regional needs. That's the only way to deal with it, not in individual country cases.
Yes, sir.
Maybe you can help me understand this better. I supported sanctions against the apartheid government of South Africa, and I support sanctions against the military government of Burma. And yet, the kinds of things you're saying, obviously are quite persuasive in terms of the situation in Iraq. But I wonder if you could be a little more specific on how the government of Iraq is different, if it is, in general terms, from the governments that we would have supported or we might support sanctions against, and how are the mechanisms of the sanctions in place against Iraq different from, if they are in some important ways, from those other sanctions that would lead us to be opposed to them when applied to Iraq as opposed to when applied to those other countries? Or is your position that there ought never be sanctions at all?
Well, firstly, I think sanctions have proven to be a fairly failed approach to influencing member states. Right now, I understand there are something like 75, 80 unilateral sanctions on the part of Washington. I don't know what results they're producing. I take it Cuba is not a model of success. The United Nations is involved in less. But again, I don't see great success. Even South Africa, though ultimately we may feel it worked, the cost to the people of South Africa was significant. But I agree, that does stand out. The case of Burma or Myanmar has been largely unsuccessful. One of the distinctions there, I think, is that the ASEAN group have included Burma in its association as an observer, as a participatory member, not a full member perhaps, which is part of the philosophy of including and collaborating with even those that you don't necessarily agree with, in the hope that somehow you can influence them in some other way. And I think that is got to be the way to go. Now, what makes Iraq different, perhaps, is 8 years of sanctions, which I guess nobody anticipated. When these sanctions were set in motion, there was a hope that 6 months, 1 year would somehow do it. And of course, great progress was made in those early years. UNSCOM, in fact, destroyed much greater quantities of military hardware than the Gulf War itself destroyed. I think what's gone wrong is that it's been prolonged over such a long period, and the damage to the people of the country have now become of paramount importance, which you can only, I think, argue for raising the sanctions and finding some other way to influence Iraqi leadership. Now, what is that other way? I think that's the last part of your question. There's no easy answer to that. But without a dialogue, without participation, without working together with Iraq, and after all, don't forget this, the United States, this country, provided Iraq with vast quantities of military hardware as recently as 89, maybe even into 1990, or no, maybe I'm slightly wrong, but during the Iran-Iraq war. You know, good guys become bad guys very quickly sometimes, but they can also happily become good guys again. And that's something we need to find. And there is as I said before, a major vested interest on the part of this country and European countries to re-establish Iraq as a player in the world stage. Because there's an industry there, there's opportunities, even if it's only selfish opportunities to invest and have returns and do business. But it would in fact benefit, I think, the Iraqi people, who in isolation are going nowhere and going down the hill in terms of basic needs and right to expectations and the things that all of us here expect for ourselves and for our families.
You endorse an international consumer boycott against the United Nations Security Council members to stop the genocidal embargo against the people of Iraq. I mean, people of Iraq, they only ask for the end of the sanctions, and they continue with the disarmament process. I mean, all the countries that have nuclear and biological and other kinds of mass destruction weapons should do the same or use Iraq. It's a sovereign country. He attacked the United States in the war with any kind of weapons or whatever. They have the weapons to destroy the U.S. forces there, but they did not use them. I mean, how do you say that like that? Can you ask me that question, sir, about the boycott? Would you endorse it?
Well, the question was, should we have a boycott of all of the 5 members of the Security Council? Well, it's an interesting idea. One boggles at the practicality of implementing it, because so many of us... Well, I mean, in principle, maybe it's an effective tool. It's something to be considered. It certainly has worked in other cases. But let's think about how that would be implemented.
Yes, sir.
Just to repeat Clinton's words, he said that only Saddam Hussein listened to him and let the UNSCOM do their work. They'll certify them and they'll be all done, and sanctions will be lifted. How true, in your opinion, since you were there and you have insider information, how true is that statement? Do you think is it possible that they ever certify Iraq sometimes in this century or the next century? Or?
So I think that last part of your statement is what worries me. We can't wait for that long. And the fact is, I think we're now down to a situation where we're looking for needles in haystacks. As I said, UNSCOM has done incredibly good work. They've uncovered vast quantities of material, of nuclear, missiles, all the rest of it, and destroyed the manufacturing capability and hardware and what have you. To continue this program in the hope that they're going to find 100%, I think is unreal. It reminds me of the MIA situation, whether it's North Korea or Vietnam. That there's no answer to that. There's no solution. You'll never find everything, no matter how hard you look. Therefore, to sustain sanctions on this sort of MIA, looking for the needle in the haystack program, is a political decision which has some other agenda. That's all I can assume. What that agenda is, we can speculate. I don't want to do that. But it's not as simple. And I think the Iraqis feel that they have done their best. We all may disagree with that or not, but they have yielded up a lot of information. One perhaps forgets that after the war, chaos reigned in Iraq. The military were in complete disarray. What happened to some of the hardware, to missiles, to whatever, is not clearly known, and there may be genuinely missing pieces which nobody can trace. Many of the scientists and those who worked on these weapons systems have left the country. And there is a real problem in finding every last piece of hardware or VX or whatever it may happen to be. As I said before, we're going to have to take a risk. Whether it's now or 5 years or 10 years, this cannot go on. I think the United States will be the last country standing alone, I would say, at this rate. It's going to crumble. It has already crumbled. The decision, of course, of last week doesn't help, because those who believe that sanctions should be raised are now, of course, put in a very awkward spot of finding that Iraq doesn't really help them to do their job, and that's really most unfortunate. But I have no answer to that.
A couple more questions, and then Nancy Gus, who is a member of Campaign for the Iraqi People, would like to show you some photographs and some pictures and give you some information about her recent trip to Iraq as well too. So we'd like to make sure that there's some room for that as well. So just a couple more. Yes, sir.
Which one? Okay, thanks. Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit more about your view of the sort of political situation, the domestic political situation in Iraq, which I think is a little bit curious. I'm the son of a couple of those 2 million Iraqis who are Iraqi professionals working abroad, but they didn't leave. They left during the second wave of the sort of expatriate exodus, which was in 1973 when Saddam was performing public hangings in Liberation Square and encouraging people to have picnics under their feet. And I'm not sure necessarily that the role of the government, I believe that the role of the government might be central to understanding the effect of the sanctions in Iraq. The brain drain had started long before. Right now, when I was there in 1990, there were, I think, 4 Republican palaces in Baghdad. Rumor had it that they were valued about $250 million, something like that. When I went back in 97, there were 9 of these giant, opulent palaces with huge pictures of them, and they were valued somewhere around, rumor on the street had it around $5 billion, something like that. These numbers aren't really valid because they're rumor, but the question is how does the role of the government fit into the sort of the sanctions regime? If you lifted the sanctions tomorrow without taking a look at the political situation, would that solve all the problems, some of the problems, most of the problems? That's the question.
No, I have to agree with you that raising the sanctions tomorrow will not solve the crisis of Iraq, because the investment required to rebuild the infrastructure, whether it's health, water and sanitation, agricultural, domestic production, whatever, electric power, is vast. You're talking 50, maybe to $100 billion. You need a Marshall Plan of huge proportions. I don't think that's likely to happen. So the Iraqis will have to do it themselves. Meantime, they're sitting on a massive debt burden, which is an obligation they're not likely to get off the hook, but perhaps debt rescheduling will be viable. It's very hard to say what the correct. I don't know the correct answer, perhaps, to your question. But I think we have got to have faith that the Iraqi government will stick to the appropriate priorities. And if there is control of arms sales to Iraq and control of imported supplies and hardware and what have you, I think the resources that will be available, which will be inadequate because the oil prices are so low, oil production levels are also low, there will, I think, be a rebuilding of infrastructure, job creation. I mean, I'm I guess, optimistic that the right decisions will be made, and you may feel less so, and you've more right to do so, given your experience and your background, perhaps. You're right, the outflow began a long time ago. What I said was that since sanctions have kicked in, the problem has simply been greatly exacerbated by unemployment and lack of opportunities. So it's a continuing brain drain, is what you've just said. And that's, I think, a great concern for the future. The best minds, the best people may be leaving the country. That's a real problem.
I know that we still have a number of questions, but for the next 10 minutes, what we would like to do while we are still here is to invite Nancy Gus to share with you some photographs and some information from her recent trip. And then perhaps later on we can continue with some sort of a question and answer session as well too. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank Mr. Halliday for